I'd like to begin our evening by introducing Rick Ginsberg, our dean, and Rick will give a little bit of a welcome.
Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. My son is a freshman at Lawrence High School, and of all things, he's studying Latin. One of the great teachers in the district is the Latin teacher there. And, you know, Latin is the language of the Roman Empire, and of course they were very similar to the Greeks, and the whole way that this man teaches along with learning the Latin. My son said to me, "Dad, will this help me get into college?" And I said, "I don't know about that, but if you ever run into the Pope on the street, you're in." But every Friday he tells stories, because that's what Latin and Greek is. It's a language of stories, and that's how they told their tales, and that's what the epics are all about. We all read them, and stories are really important, whether they be through word or through picture. I mean, some of you are young enough that I may be too old for you in this, but there used to be things all spread across our landscape called bookstores. Do you remember those things? I read electronically, and I love it, but I love bookstores because it allowed you to look at the books and see the pictures and see the words and find the serendipitous. They were wonderful places, and we are just really blessed today to have two wonderful writers who tell their stories through words and through pictures, and they both ironically happen to be graduates of the University of Kansas. I've had the opportunity to meet them both in the past and see their works and read their books, and I must tell you that we are really blessed to have both Stephen Johnson and Andrea Warren here today. So welcome. Thank you for being here. Diane, you'll probably tell them a little something about the Strong endowment, but thank you for being here. This is a special night for us. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to share a little bit of information about how these presentations are made possible. If you're a student in the School of Education, you've probably seen the sign in the little room in the Learning Resource Center that says Gertrude Way Strong Children's Literature Collection. You've also seen a picture in there, a photo. You may have wondered, who was Gertrude Way Strong, and how did the children's book collection come to be named in her honor? Gertrude Way Strong graduated from KU in 1929 with a degree in psychology. She was always interested in reading. She worked in education at the state level in Massachusetts basically as a school, what we would call a school psychologist today. And she understood the importance of reading to your children. After World War II, as the wife of Professor Frank Strong, who was the son of KU's Chancellor Strong, she was the wife of this law professor at Ohio State. Mrs. Strong created a book club to encourage faculty families to read to their children. She purchased new books every year, rotated them among the faculty families at Ohio State, and in the summer, the families purchased their favorites at a picnic, and that gave Mrs. Strong money to purchase books for the next year. Mrs. Strong also helped her daughter, the late Mary Strong Brennan, a KU elementary education major, I believe she graduated in the 60s, to gather books for a classroom library when Mary was a young teacher in Colorado and then in Johnson County, Kansas. After the death of Mrs. Strong, the Strong family wanted to honor her, and the endowment proposal to help grow a School of Education children's book collection and support lectures given by authors and illustrators of children's books was the perfect match. The Gertrude Way Strong collection is housed in our Learning Resource Center across the hall. This endowment is helping us to grow that collection, one that our students use for many of their classes. Relatives of Gertrude Way Strong, including her great-grandchildren, students in the Shawnee Mission Schools, joined us in the past for these lectures, but were unable to do so for this event. We're sorry they're not here to be recognized for this major contribution to the School of Education. Next, I would like to introduce Mrs. Allison Paddock, one of our instructors in the Department of Curriculum and Teaching, to introduce our first speaker. Allison?
Thank you, Diane. Good evening. I'm here to introduce our first guest, Ms. Andrea Warren. Ms. Warren grew up in a small town of Grove, Nebraska, about 2 hours northwest of Omaha. She attended the University of Nebraska, graduating in 1968 with degrees in English and education and minors in speech and history. She continued her education at the University of Nebraska, receiving her master's degree in British literature in 1971. She then went on to teach middle school and high school for 11 years. It was during her teaching days that she wrote her first stories for publication. Ms. Warren became a Kansan when she moved to Lawrence to study for her master's degree in journalism, which she received in 1983 from KU. She lived in Lawrence for 10 years and has since resided in the Kansas City area. Houghton Mifflin published her first book, Orphan Train Rider, One Boy's True Story, in 1996. The success of that book inspired her to follow it with other nonfiction books for children. She has been honored with many awards, including the Boston Globe Horn Award for her book, Orphan Train Rider, as well as the 2002 Robert F. Seibert Honor Book Award and the William Allen White Award, both for surviving Hitler, a boy in the Nazi death camps. Like many Midwesterners, she has briefly lived other places. But to quote her, "I always return, for my roots are deep in the soil of Kansas and Nebraska." 2 of her 8 books for young readers are set right here in the Midwest. I'm sure you will agree with me that we are very glad that she resides and works amongst us so that we are afforded the unique opportunity of having her with us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, Andrea Warren.
Well, let me see if I can get the microphones correct first. I'm going to be here, and can you hear me all right? If I'm standing right here, all right. So if you can't, kind of signal at me, and I'll see if I can do something to adjust it. It's really wonderful to be here. I was here 10 years ago to talk with those of you who were here for the Gertrude Strong Memorial Library, and to come back where there's a children's library is, for me, I can't think of a setting that would be more dear to my heart. I have, for the last 20 years, been writing nonfiction books for young readers. And sometimes I'll meet someone and they go, "Now, what, nonfiction? Why nonfiction? Why don't you write fiction?" And students will even ask me that too. And I'll say, well, I can write fiction, and I've written fiction, and I've published fiction, but it's actually more of a challenge to write nonfiction, because I can only work with the material that I have at hand and create a story out of that. And what I have learned is that if you do that, if you write your nonfiction and use a lot of the elements of fiction writing, that people often like it as much or sometimes even more. Kids will tell me they like it even more sometimes than fiction because they know it's a true story and they take it a little bit differently. I can't rely on wizards and things like that to get my story told. I need real people, and I need their words, and I need them telling me what their feelings were about things that happened to them, because I'm always looking very much for the emotional story that goes along with the physical story, what happened to people. We're, I think, more enlightened about nonfiction now. In the beginning, when I was writing books of nonfiction for young readers and young adults, if you go to a bookstore, all the nonfiction was classified together. So you had books about animals and nature and space and history all together, and usually on the bottom shelf. And that's, sometimes even a very obscure bottom shelf somewhere. So they've never been celebrated quite in the same way. But right now, there's a book on the New York Times bestseller list that's been there for many, many months. It's nonfiction for young adults, I Am Malala. Perhaps some of you have read it. And so, it's a slow start, but these books are starting to have that kind of an impact, and especially in the classroom. Some of that's due to the Common Core, because there's more recognition now for nonfiction and what it can teach students. That's one of the reasons, but I think some of it is that nonfiction writers like me are realizing that there's this thing called creative nonfiction. People will often classify me as somebody who writes biography, and I always kind of bristle at that because that's really not what I do. I will tell somebody's story, but usually I'm after the story, what happened to them as a child, and then I'll kind of quickly summarize what happens to them as an adult. So it really doesn't work quite as biography. I'm at a story, I'm writing about history, but I'm doing it through the eyes of a young protagonist, and this is what I do that's different. I didn't have any models for this when I started out. I'm not the only one doing it. You see up on the screen right now where it says the Nonfiction Minute, so nonfictionminute.com. And this is part of a group I belong to called Inc. Think Tank. And what we do, we are children's book writers. We've been invited into this group. We're all nonfiction writers. We've all won major book awards. And we do this literally as a public service when we write this Nonfiction Minute. It appears online at the nonfictionminute.com every single school day. And it's a 400-word piece of writing that has something, it's always nonfiction, but it can be about whatever the author chooses to write about. We illustrate it with photos. We record it. So if you look at any of my nonfiction minutes, you will hear me speaking them if you choose to, if you turn that on. And that gives it a whole new dimension because students who are following along learn how we emphasize words. This is invaluable, we're told, in ESL classes. Teachers there really love this. And we've only been doing this, we're in our second year, and we're getting incredible feedback. We get tens of thousands of hits every single time one of these is published. And we do it for free, as I said. So take advantage of it. It's a very valuable classroom tool, but again, it'll show you how creative nonfiction can be. I was asked to write the very first one, and so I keep saying this can be creative, but I'm gonna kind of try to show you. I wanted to set the bar as high as I could so that all of us would be stretching ourselves to write nonfiction and to do it in a creative manner. And so what I did, let's see if I can make sure I've got this. Okay, this picture is going to become very important in just a minute. I wrote 400 words that I titled How to Interview a Historic Building. When I interview people in my work as a writer, I soak up the stories they share about their lives. This is what brings history alive. I've always wished for a way to interview historic buildings because they could tell stories from such a different perspective, having seen it all and heard it all. My dream interview would be St. Paul's Cathedral in London, a place rich with history and therefore with stories. I've learned that those with the most to say can be wary of interviewers. Sometimes employing a little charm can help them warm up. So I would begin by complimenting St. Paul's on how wonderful it looks for a building that opened in 1708. I would reference its great architect, Christopher Wren, who was also an astronomer and a mathematician, as is evidenced in many of its design elements. I'd mention its magnificent dome and its massive booming bells that can be heard for miles. You're the prized jewel in a city rich in architectural beauty, I'd say. No wonder so many notables have been baptized, married, and had their funerals here. Flattered, but still reserved, St. Paul's might ask me what I like best about it. I have two favorites, I would reply earnestly, mentioning first the crypt, where many of England's war heroes are buried, along with famous painters and poets. Writers and composers are at nearby Westminster Abbey. Other notables, like Florence Nightingale and Lawrence of Arabia, are here too. It's altogether quite a congenial place. Starting to thaw a bit, St. Paul's might wonder aloud about my second favorite, and I would single out the American Memorial Chapel, located behind the high altar, and dedicated to the memory of the 28,000 Americans who died defending England in World War II. And speaking of that war, I would tell St. Paul's, I am awed by Londoners' resolve that you, their national treasure, would not be destroyed during the Blitz when so much of the city burned. Volunteer firefighters, both men and women, were stationed at all times on your roof. When bombs exploded, starting fires, they were right there to put them out, a number of them sacrificing their lives. St. Paul's would nod, remembering. The British love you very much, I would say. St. Paul's would pause, clear its throat, and then reply, let me tell you some of my stories. Okay. So what I was doing here was introducing a whole bunch of things kids didn't know anything about, but I wanted to get them curious. I want to get them excited about it. They want to know more about St. Paul's. They want to know more about Christopher Wren. They might even want to know more about the Blitz in World War II. I won't go into any more about that because I have a lot of other things I'd like to address this evening, but I just want to challenge you about the way you think as a classroom teacher about nonfiction and how you can use it with your students. You can use it to inspire student writing, vocabulary building, to pique interest in a historical topic. I mean, the list is really endless. Kids get nonfiction, and many of them love it. As I said, it speaks to them because it's true. Yes, it can be dull. You know, you think back to your history textbooks, facts, dates, names of rivers and generals and peace treaties, and, you know, we all kind of yawn. But tell the story of a child who was present at an event, and you have young readers hooked because they identify with that child. They become that child, whether it's a boy or girl. Books like mine supplement the curriculum, and they often become the curriculum, or at least this is happening more and more these days, especially in schools where kids have access to readers, and therefore schools can load books down. It's much cheaper than having to hand the child a book. So we're going to see even more of this, I think. I'm going to mention Orphan Train Rider several times this evening. It's the book I'm probably best known for, along with Surviving Hitler. And what I'm finding that's happening is that schools are taking this book and the companion book, We Rode the Orphan Trains, and they're using these as a standalone unit because, believe it or not, the orphan trains still don't rate even a footnote in American textbooks, or if they do, it's recent editions that I have not seen. And teachers are realizing how much American history they can teach through these books. The Industrial Revolution, the history of immigration, the railroads, labor shortages, child welfare. I'm actually going to get back to this in a few minutes and mention it again, but you can teach a great deal of American history through looking at the history of the orphan trains and have the kids captivated the whole time because they're learning the stories of children like them. So to talk about the books, obviously I just mentioned Orphan Train Rider. Here's the cover. And this was a book on a topic that was obscure when I started going after it. I didn't have the internet to help me with research, so researching this one on through Surviving Hitler was very different than what I've had to do since I've had the help with the internet. Sometimes I'll talk to kids about what that was like, you know, those early days of writing books, and they can't even believe it because their world is so different now. But with Orphan Train Rider, I took the story of one boy and interspersed it with a 75-year history, the history of the orphan trains, and went back and forth, a chapter of history, a story about the boy, Lee Nailing, and what he was experiencing, back to the history, and so on. And tried to keep it all lively enough that people would get through that history part because they wanted to get back to the story of Lee Nailing. And the book, We Rode the Orphan Trains, was not structured that way. This time I wrote more of a chapter book. I was running out of time on this because what really motivated me to write this book was that several writers that I had met had died. And I had gotten acquainted with about 24 of the writers. I'd gone to one of their reunions and had interviewed them and taped them. And I knew that while I'd already written Orphan Train Rider, people learned a lot about the trains through the story of Lee Nailing, that there was a lot missing. The story of girls, was that different than the boys? And indeed, sometimes it was. People went different places, the kids went different places for different reasons, taken by different kinds of families. They came out of different family situations. Some of them were immigrant children right literally off the boats in New York City and then got swept up in this huge city where there were no social services at the time, where children could get easily lost, where parents, because they had so many children, might literally open the door and turn out the eldest. These are the kinds of things that happen to the children in my stories. And these are tough, tough things. And you know, you can question, are young readers ready for this kind of material? And in my experience, they're more ready than the adults around them to hear these things. The kids are very open to this sort of thing, and they want to know why. And once you get them at that point, they want to know why. Why did this happen? Then you've got them. So again, lots of identity with the stories of what happened to the children. I also included a chapter about one of the matrons who traveled with the trains, who went west with them, and what that was like from an adult perspective. So by the time kids read these two books, they know everything they need to know really about the orphan trains. And like I said, I hope one of these days we're going to see this to be a more accepted part of our story of American history. When people ask me why it's not there, I don't know the answer, of course, but I do know that nobody's paid much attention to the history of children. And it's hard to find books on that. It's hard to find books like mine where the stories are there. We don't give them, you know, the credibility until they're adults. And nothing could be further from the truth. There's nothing that's happened in our history or any other country's history that didn't somehow impact kids. There's no way that it wouldn't be that way. And when these things are so dramatic or traumatic, they don't ever forget them. And it can be hard helping them to remember. I've had to learn a lot of techniques for helping people recover their memories they don't necessarily want to, but when they do, the stories really pour out. The next book, Pioneer Girl, A True Story of Growing Up on the Prairie, has come out. It's been in 2 editions. It was first published by Morrow before Morrow was bought out by HarperCollins, and HarperCollins just really never paid any attention to this book, and it kind of got lost. They always said, it's a regional book, but interestingly, yes, but it's always had strong national sales. I got interested in writing this, as Allison said in the introduction, I grew up in Nebraska in a little town, a town of 1,000 people. I mostly grew up there. I was born there, and then our family lived on the West Coast for a few years and then came back to this little town. My father was the superintendent of schools there, so I was very much a town kid, and I'd had this exposure to the city when we lived on the West Coast and to another way of life. So I came at it not necessarily taking it for granted. It wasn't necessarily the scenario, the scenery that I had grown up with, because I'd had this interlude in Oregon for 4 years. And when I would go visit friends who lived on the farm, I really felt like I was on another planet. I never had any affinity with it, and I never actually developed any. So you might wonder why I would spend a year of my life writing a story about homestead children. But even though I couldn't ever find my place there, I could appreciate the people who were there. And I could appreciate the history, that they were living in the house built by a grandfather, that they had the original homestead deed. These were kids who were getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do chores before they would drive into school, where I'd gotten up 30 minutes earlier, and then done a 5-minute walk to school while they'd done a half-hour driving in a beat-up old pickup truck to come, and they'd already put in what to me was a day's work. And so I could truly appreciate, and as I got older, what it took to make the Midwest the breadbasket of the world. And I was a big fan of the Little House on the Prairie books, but not every kid got a ma and a pa. And there was a lot of malnutrition on the prairie. There was a lot of domestic violence. And it's not that I set out to write that story, but I did want to write the real story. So when you read Pioneer Girl, you are in this soddy where you've got to dig a well that's 150 feet deep before you're going to have your own water supply. 150 feet deep, the height of a 13-story building, where you've got to watch the skies because of the weather, when locusts can come, as they do in this book, and eat everything. When tornadoes are a constant threat, as are prairie fires. And then, of course, there's all the illness. There's all these components. Then there's the loneliness, the isolation of the prairie, and the fact that a lot of these kids didn't get an education because they had to help their families on the farm. And yet, when I would read these accounts, I never heard anybody complaining about it. I was reading it and complaining in my own head for them, but this was their life. They were part of something bigger than themselves, being part of these family units who created these farms, and they really treasured them. And so it's a book I'm very fond of. To write it, I had to have my child, and since I was writing about the 1880s, when that part of the country, when central Nebraska was being homesteaded, I wasn't going to get a first-hand interview with the child, but I was fortunate because I found a book called No Time on My Hands that was a memoir of Grace McCants Snyder. She'd written it, her daughter had really written it, Nellie Snyder Yost, and it was full of all the stories, starting when Grace and her family arrived from Missouri to central Nebraska when Grace was 3 years old. And Grace had one of those fabulous memories, and the stories were all there. And 2 of her 4 children were still alive and allowed me to interview them at length, and I got all these additional stories and incorporated a lot of stories of other pioneers. So there was really rich source material. I was very excited about writing this book. It's probably the easiest one I wrote, and one of the most enjoyable. Which brings us to Surviving Hitler, neither easy nor necessarily enjoyable by any means. But because I had been an educator for 11 years and had friends who were teachers and librarians, and always was very tuned into that world of education, and my family's been a big part of that. And I knew there had been several different incidents where I was visiting with with teachers, or I was at a conference or something and was hearing about, this goes back to the late 90s when schools were starting to mandate Holocaust education. And they were struggling with this whole topic of the camps. They could get the rest of it, and they were, creating good teaching materials for kids, but the questions would inevitably come up. Kids are curious, they want to know, what about the camps? What were those camps like? And I took it on as a personal challenge. I knew that we had a big survivor community in Kansas City, and I just felt that among that survivor community I could find somebody. I was not connected, I didn't know anybody personally, but we had the Midwest Center for Holocaust Education in Overland Park, and I went there and they had taped a project that had been financed by Steven Spielberg with the profits from the movie Schindler's List, and they'd done these long interviews with survivors. And so I checked out a lot of those and started reading and listening, reading the transcripts, watching these people on tape, and I kept coming back to Jack Mandelbaum. There were several reasons for that. One was his willingness to access these very deep, dark memories. So often, if you'd ask a Holocaust survivor something they really didn't want to think about, they'd sort of have created this safe box for themselves. And if you were asking a question inside, they were all right with it. But the minute you asked something else, they'd deflect somehow, and they'd say, well, yes, that was terrible, but, and then they'd bring you back to where they were comfortable talking. Jack didn't do that. So when I met Jack, and as I started getting to know him, as he agreed to do this project with me, it was really an amazing collaboration. It's the only one I've ever had like this. I don't know if you can tell it from reading the books, but it's really true. I have never had the privilege of working with somebody who had a photographic memory, was willing to do it, had turned himself into a Holocaust genius. I mean, he could answer anything. He's a scholar up there, ranks with the best of them, even though he had what amounts to an 8th grade education. And Jack was a man who all his life has given back. He's very wealthy, and much of his wealth goes to help others. He's been a civil rights advocate from the get-go, involved in all kinds of things in Kansas City that have to do with that. He's amazing. I could tell you lots of stories about him. I'm not going to do it, but I would if I had more time, because I love to talk about Jack. Still alive and well and living in Florida now, and still travels a great deal. Spent 3 months in China last year, for example. Goes back to Poland every year. He has a home there in the town where he was born and spent the first 12 years of his life. So this is a book that I knew immediately. I didn't like the topic of the Holocaust, and I had to study a lot because I had always pretty much avoided this subject at any cost. I didn't like it. It was not pleasant to be there in that world. I know I don't have to explain that to you. But I could see that I had this curiosity. If you were put in this camp, how did you survive this? And then, Jack would say the very first thing was luck. So that determined a lot of it. But beyond that, there were certain things you could do and certain ways of thinking that could help you get through all of this. And so that became my goal, to get that story of the psychological survival that this experience required. And it has impacted students more than anything I've written. And I know this because of what I hear from teachers and because of the notes kids write to me. And sometimes they're doing it because it's an assignment, and sometimes they do it because I'm easy to find on the internet these days, AndreaWarren.com. And they want to tell me. They want to tell me what this book meant to them. Or they want me to get a message to Jack for them. And that's often what it is. Please tell Jack, and then they'll tell me what they want to know. So in the introduction to the book, I tell a story very quickly. I'm going to share it with you about an 8th grade girl who'd come to a convocation in her school to hear a Holocaust survivor named Sam Sander, who was a good friend of Jack's. This happened in Kansas City. And she wasn't paying much attention at first because she had a very difficult home life and in and out of foster care, and she had already tried to commit suicide a couple of times, and she was going to try again that day and felt that this time she would succeed. And that's what was on her mind when she walked in to hear Sam speaking that day. And she started listening to him, and by the time Sam was done with his story, and he was a 14-year-old boy when he was taken to the camps, the same age as this girl, and she realized that if he could get through that experience and still have a life that was good, a life that had been full of joy, a life where he had been able to give back in many ways, that she could get through what she was going through. And she later wrote Sam a letter, which Sam showed to me, and said these very things. She said, I just want to thank you. Things are a lot better now, and I know that whatever happens, I can get through it, and you're the one who taught me that. So those are the kinds of ways that students can connect. And again, this is with a true story. So they know it actually happened. They see the photos in the book. You know, they hear the person's words. If they want, they can look at all the citations in the back of the book and see where the information came from. The next book, Escape from Saigon, was another war book. Excuse me a moment. And I had a couple of reasons for wanting to write this book. One, I have a daughter adopted from Vietnam, and I wanted to write about an event called Operation Baby Lift. I actually wanted to title the book that, but a friend of mine who teaches 8th grade said, let me try that with my kids. And she came back and she said, just as I suspected. They heard the title and they laughed. And I thought, okay, wrong reaction. That's not going to work as a title. So it became Escape from Saigon. And this is a story, well, it's a story of a boy in Vietnam who was 8 years old when he was airlifted out of Saigon on Operation Baby Lift and brought to the United States. You know, it's the story of any child who has to leave the country of their birth and leave behind family and come make their way in a new world where they may be a minority. You know, kids, all different kinds of circumstances, and of course I know this and you know this. So this is a book that was written for those kids. I had all those kids in mind, and I also wanted to tell this story of this remarkable event that happened at the end of the Vietnam War when 2,500 children were airlifted out of Saigon. And in the introduction, I do tell the story of my daughter, but just in the introduction. It's not her book. It's really about the boy, Long, that you see on the cover here of the book. I had a letter from a middle school librarian in Emporia after I had visited the school there to talk about surviving Hitler. And it's very quick, but I just want to read it to you because, again, I just want to emphasize here how these kids take these stories and internalize them. Dear Ms. Warren, I want to tell you about one of our students, a quiet, reserved 8th grader who rarely spoke. He came to the United States several years ago from Vietnam. Now, he wouldn't have had to be from Vietnam, but he happened to be. Okay. His teacher told me that when he returned from your presentation on surviving Hitler, he sat very still, lost in thought. The teacher asked him what he was thinking, and he said simply, "It is so sad." Then he started talking about how the Vietnam War had destroyed much of his family. The next time he came to the library, I handed him a copy of Escape from Saigon. He read it in 2 days and is asking for more stories about displaced children. You have sparked a fire in that boy. Several teachers have commented that he's participating in class and reading more than ever before. I want you to know that your books touch readers' hearts. Thank you for dedicating your talents to writing for young people. So these are the kinds of things, you know, writers live for, to get notes like this. But it just reaffirmed what I was doing and why I was doing it, and kept me going here because I had one more war book I wanted to write, and that's Under Siege, 3 Children at the Civil War Battle for Vicksburg. Now, this was a tough one because I could only work from historical sources. You know, this happened in the Civil War, and that's all I could do. You know, I could only work with secondary sources where people had written down their memories of what had happened during that siege. And you might wonder why. People don't seem to hear a lot about Vicksburg, but it was actually an 8th grade boy. I'm back to 8th graders here. They can be such mouthy kids, you know. I taught 8th grade for a year. So I knew all about 8th graders. And this boy, in one of the Blue Valley schools in Kansas City, and I'd come out to talk about surviving Hitler and Escape from Saigon, the other books, and he came up to me and he just said with this swagger, he said, "Yeah, I know." I said, "Yeah, but this stuff all just happens to kids in other countries." And then just kind of walked away, and it's like, no, wait a minute. And I got him to come back. I said, you know, this country, it's been invaded with a foreign army, part of it has, and these things happen to kids here. He had no idea what I was even referring to. So I said, you know, the North invaded the South during the Civil War, and he said, "Yeah, but that wasn't anything. That wasn't anything." So, you know, that comment just didn't go away. So I have an interest in the Civil War. I certainly knew about Vicksburg. You know, this town of 5,000 people on the Mississippi River, sieged for 47 days by Grant's army, bombed, flattened, starved, cut off from its water supply. The people dug caves to live in to try to stay safe, and did stay safe. I mean, that's one of the things that makes this story work. There were very, very few fatalities. People lived alongside their slaves in these caves. Everybody was in the same boat together, including what we would estimate to be 1,000 children. If you had a town of 5,000, probably 1,000 of them were under the age of 18. And I pieced together from the archives. I went to Vicksburg and worked in their archival library there, and found stories of 2 children who had been inside Vicksburg during that entire siege, and wrote about it later. And I've, unfortunately had to write about children of a higher class because they were literate. The truth of it is the poor children, the slave children, couldn't read and write, so they didn't leave their memoirs, as these 2 did. And I was ready to leave Vicksburg. I've been working with a historian there who just had given me wonderful information. He'd grown up there. His grandparents had lived during the siege and so forth. And I just said out loud, kind of mumbled it, probably said, boy, I love the story, and I'm going to write it, and I'm going to write it from the perspective of Southerners. But I said, I sure wish I had a way to tell the story from the Northern perspective, too. And he just kind of eyed me, and then he said in one of these drawls that was just, thick as Mississippi mud, where you just pull the words to the mud, and he said, well, he said, there was a boy on the other side. General Grant had his 12-year-old son Frederick with him during the entire siege. Okay, writer's heart goes boom, boom, boom like that. So I dug out Frederick. I would have found Frederick because I was reading Grant's memoir and Julia Grant, his wife's memoir, and they talk about Frederick being at Vicksburg the entire time with his father. We were talking about an 18-month siege here. And, that they thought this Frederick wanted to grow up to be a military man like his father, and this would be a good experience. It was worth taking him out of school, and he'd keep Grant company, shared a tent with Grant and so forth. He was present for every major thing that happened there. And not only that, he got typhus, he was shot. He was shot in the leg and almost died came very close to having his leg amputated. So Frederick really opened up another world to me so that I could talk about this boy who had the freedom as the general's son to live with the soldiers. He wasn't supposed to ever be on the battlefield, but he wasn't a kid who followed orders either. So he saw it all. He was a wonderful eyewitness. And he wasn't much of a writer, but he was interviewed several times later in life about his experiences at Vicksburg. And that gave me all I needed. And then I fleshed out the story with things written by soldiers and generals and townspeople who lived in Vicksburg during that awful siege, 47 days before they finally had to surrender on the 4th of July. They never forgave their general for that. So it's just an amazing story, and it got overshadowed because the day of the surrender of Vicksburg was the day of Pickett's charge at Gettysburg, and that's what made all the headlines. Vicksburg was a messy thing. Vicksburg was messy, but Gettysburg was glorious, and it's what captured America's attention. But more and more, I think we realized that Vicksburg was, as Abraham Lincoln said, Vicksburg was the key to winning the war. So you'll learn a lot of history, and you'll meet some remarkable children. This looks a little fuzzy here. This is Charles Dickens and the Street Children of London. This is the first time a story found me. I was living in London for a semester, teaching there, and spending time really getting to know the city. And I took a walk one day called the London Foundling. Wanted to learn a little bit more about what the British did to help their homeless children. Turns out not much. And it's like within every minute, when we had 2 guides, and one of the guides was talking, the name Charles Dickens would come up. And we had this little break, and I approached one of the leaders. They had a teacher and a librarian leading the tour, no surprise there. And I said, what is it you're saying about Charles Dickens? If you heard in the introduction, I have a master's degree in British literature. I've read a lot of Dickens. But I just couldn't see the big picture here. I didn't know really what they were saying about this. And this librarian, as the British often do towards Americans, they kind of like if we were dogs, they would pat us on the head and say, oh, nice doggy butt. And essentially what she was saying to me in that tone of voice was, well, you Americans, you study Dickens as an author. You put him in literature classes. But here in England, he's our greatest reformer. We don't necessarily read the books, but we all know what he did for people here, what he did for the poor. And I instantly had a book title in my head. It's just never happened to me before. This was the title. I got my research credentials at the British Library and started spending all my time. It was a rainy fall, so I had wonderful afternoons there doing research that it turned out I couldn't replicate here in the States. I tried. And really got at the heart of what Dickens was up to in his novels, in a lot of his novels, not all of them, where he had a goal. He was, for instance, trying to soften the hearts of the wealthy to be more charitable towards the poor, all right? There's a Christmas Carol right there. And how do you get people's attention? Well, you know, everybody believed in the paranormal back then and ghosts, so let's have a ghost story. Let's do more than have a ghost story. Let's not just have a ghost, let's have 3 ghosts who come in the night, you know, the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future. Let's have an apparition come from hell dragging his chains behind him towards Orange Scrooge. You know, all these devices that Dickens used to tell this wonderful tale that really did increase charitable giving and make Christmas a major holiday, by the way, in England. Or Oliver Twist, you know, which helped to bring about reform in the workhouses. Not enough, but at least it was a start. Books that helped close these horrible boarding schools that kids were sent to. Books that helped to bring about pollution reform and air quality reform. I mean, there were so many things that Dickens did. And when he would speak out, when he would go to visit a ragged school, so-called because the children who attended them were dressed very raggedly and would never be admitted to another kind of school, and would urge poor children, go, get an education. When he wrote A Tale of Two Cities to warn the British, if you don't do something to help the poor, if you don't change things here, we're going to have guillotines in the streets of London. And, you know, you've got your warning with the French Revolution, now shape up. And they listened, and they did it, and there was never a revolution in England like there was in Russia, for example, or France. So, you know, he was very loved and admired, and it was a lot of work to write about him and to get back into the books and do the research I needed to do, but it was a good scholarly exercise. And of course I learned a great deal about Dickens himself. He had so much talent. I mean, he wrote an opera, for heaven's sake. He could have written anything. He was so good. The talent just poured from him, but he chose to write these stories to direct our attention at social reform, and probably was one of the greatest, if not right up there at the top of reformers who've ever lived, in terms of the impact that he had. So you'll learn about Dickens. And then this brings me to the book that came out last fall, my second book set in the Midwest, which Allison referred to earlier. I wanted to write about Bleeding Kansas. When I came to Kansas as a graduate student, I knew nothing. I'd never heard the name Quantrill, and I lived in Old West Lawrence, and down at the end of the block was a marker with a man's name and said he died on that spot on the day of Quantrill's raid. And it's like, what was this that happened here, and why is this so important? And I never thought Lawrence paid nearly enough attention to it. They're paying more attention now, but back in the 80s, not so much. And I needed my character to tell the story through, to tell the story of Bleeding Kansas, and it was a bookseller up in Leavenworth who told me that Buffalo Bill had grown up in this area, that he grew up on a homestead right outside Leavenworth. He'd moved there when he was 7 years old, and that his father was killed by a pro-slaver. And at age 11, Billy Cody was the full-time support of his family, that he, you know, rode wagon trains west working on them. He rode the Pony Express, all these things that he did. And I thought he was perfect for it. And I had a big problem. What became the big problem in writing this book was not letting Buffalo Bill, as opposed to Billy Cody, hijack the story about Bleeding Kansas, because he's such a larger-than-life person. So I do write about the Wild West show and his adult life, but I only give over a couple chapters. See, that's not a biography. It really is the story of Billy Cody and of Bleeding Kansas. And so far, so good. The book's gotten some really lovely reviews, some wonderful reviews, and getting lots of good feedback already from kids who've read it and are learning things they never knew. I learned a lot when I was doing the research for the book. So this is the one. I hope you'll take a look at this. I'm currently at work on a book that I've tentatively titled, and it's just a tentative title. I'm tentatively titled Enemy Child. Enemy Child. And it's the story of a boy who was imprisoned with his family in one of the Japanese-American internment camps during World War II. And I started this about 18 months ago, before Donald Trump made his infamous comment about Muslims and how they should be in camps. Sure made me wish the book was already out. I could have publicized on that, but at any rate, I'm at work on it, and I have an incredible main character, a story of friendship that's very touching, and I am happily and excitedly at work on this story. So these are, you know, getting kids to connect with the past and what they can learn about the present and what they can project on the future. And they learn that other things, you know, the kids go through a lot of tough stuff. I mean, if you don't like that for kids, you keep my books away from them because most of them have to do with some hard times. Sometimes there are parents who are missing or who are awful, just bad parents, shouldn't be parents. And they're loving families too, but sometimes they can't help their children with what the kids have to go through. So what the characters in my stories do, these true characters, these true people, is find their strength from within. And often their inspiration is from people around them too. And they realize that in spite of that they can do it, that they've got the strength within them. And what I want my readers to learn is that in spite of whatever bad can happen to you, that you've got a lot of power in the choices you make for the life that you live. And I always bring that up in the stories because those are the kinds of people that I'm writing about. Your future does not have to be determined by your past. And sometimes kids just need a true story to make them realize that. If you got through that, I can get through this. If you've had a good life since that happened to you, maybe I can too. I'm going to try. So this is the kind of feedback, and this is where history can serve us so well. So I've only got a couple minutes left. I wanted to talk about some schools, mostly around the New York City area, that are using Orphan Train Writer as the core of a unit to teach about immigration and child welfare and so on. But because of my time allotment, I'm going to stop now and see if there are any questions. Yes, right there.
How long does it take you to write,
A
for
book?
example, one of your books?
Well, you know, I never am just writing a book. So I have a home office. I do a lot of interactive video conferencing with schools now. Nobody has money to bring authors to the classroom, or at least not like they used to. But the interactive video conference turns my home office into a miniature studio. And it's hard for me to sit and look into a computer screen to connect with my audience, but that's what I do. Anyway, I'm not really veering off your question. The point is I do a lot of things all at once. But if I figured out a couple of times, if I were to lay it all down every single day, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and I was working on a book, that it probably would take me a year to get through the research and the writing. And at the end of that, I would have a very solid draft that was ready for editing. When I tell students that most books will go through 50 drafts, they just can't even get their minds around that. But I tell them the day they take ownership of their words, they'll understand. And they'll start doing a lot of that kind of rewrite work themselves. So that's the best answer I can give. About a year.
Other questions?
Yes.
Do you
Steve.
have movie options on any of these?
Say it again.
Movie options?
Yes, I've come close. Actually, it's Orphan Train Writer again that's been optioned several times and has been turned into, has not yet been secured financing or anything, but it's been turned into a musical. Now, there's problems with it. You know, it's a story about children. It's a period piece. You're going to have to find old trains and old costumes, and so you need more money. You need somebody who's really going to sink some money into it. So I don't know if it'll ever happen or not, but it sure is fun just brushing up against it. My friend Nancy Picard from Kansas City is here with me this evening. Nancy, put your hand up. Nancy's a very well-known mystery writer and has a book that's not her traditional mystery that's been optioned and is coming out this next year. It's called The Scent of Rain and Lightning. It's The Scent of Rain. The Scent of Rain and Lightning, your book. Yes, and so it'll be coming out in movie form this next year. So I've been living vicariously through Nancy, who has a major motion picture coming out here. Any other questions? Then I'm going to spend my last couple of minutes going back to what I was talking about before with setting up classroom units. This school that contacted me, PS 49 in Queens, is largely immigrant children. These kids have come out of countries at war and have been for the last several decades. And there's a big settlement in Queens, a lot of help there for these people. And the teachers wanted to do a multi-approach unit using art and music, poetry, and found really wonderful sources to talk about the orphan train. So when they approached me, they wanted to set it up talking about the Industrial Revolution and economics, and I was on the phone with them, and so they couldn't see me roll my eyes, so that was a good thing. And I was trying to think of these poor students being forced into studying economics, you know, to understand the orphan trains. I thought, you know what, we can handle that in a paragraph or two. Let's not do 2 weeks on that. Instead, I suggested that they go at it from the perspective of religion and child welfare. And if you look at the class system, we shared that so much with Europe, the class system, this feeling at the time when all of this was starting in the late 1700s and the 1800s, that where you are, your class in society is determined by God. And if God wants you to be poor, then you're poor. So gosh, you should just accept that. You know, what are you complaining about? And not try to get ahead. You know, they never bothered to say that the rich are rich because they've made their fortunes on the backs of the poor. We leave that out of there. But why did we end up with, you know, 10,000 children on the streets of New York in 1850? The estimate was probably 30,000, and that's probably a low estimate, low guess. And you know, you talk about all the things that happened to immigrants. They didn't come over here in family units. They came, dad maybe first, and then they sent for mom and the kids, and mom gets on board one of those immigrant ships where 1 in 10 people died, and she might have died. And the kids get to the dock, maybe there's 13 or 14 of them, and dad's not there. And now what? You know, the streets, it turns out, are not paved in gold, and that nobody was waiting to give you housing and jobs or even train tickets to move on to another part of the country. So you get lost in this major city. You end up living in one of the worst slums we've ever known in history, and that's the Five Points area of the Lower East Side of New York. And you know, you just try to start reconstructing this for the kids who are studying it, and how are they going to ever survive this, ever get through this, and especially when there's this whole class thing about you don't deserve better. Kids were treated like criminals. If you stole a loaf of bread, you'd be thrown in prison. There was a Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals before there was one for the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. And some of the rescue work being done with children was being done by the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. So, you know, you set up these conditions, and then you bring in this young, very idealistic minister, Charles Loring Brace, who'd been raised in a very academic household. He was not only intelligent and quite optimistic about life in the world, but he was very much a part of the intelligentsia that was bringing about change in society, the Enlightenment. And it was his feeling, and again, he was a minister, that all children were God's creation and that they were born pure and innocent. They weren't born full of evil that had to be beaten out of them, the way the Puritans taught. And he felt every child was better off in a home, and started small but was very quickly flooded with children who needed his help, whatever it was. He set up the first home for newsboys and taught them how to be young businessmen and to save their money. He set up the first daycare center in America. I mean, he did so many things. He took doctors and nurses into the slums to treat the poor. Things that are still going on today in New York that he started. But most of all, he wanted homes for these kids, and those homes were not available in New York. But he felt that if he could get the kids to the countryside, then there would be good people who would help them. So anyway, you just get into all of this, and you start looking at all of this and how this is a forerunner of the modern foster care system and so on and so forth. And these kids were so hooked, these immigrant children who didn't even know their own stories about why their families had left the countries they had, or why did grandma cry so much every day? You know, what was, and so the kids are asking me, well, how do you learn that story? And so we talked about how to go to grandma and say, Grandma, tell me about when you were a little girl. What did you like to eat? You know, start with something easy. And when you get to the hard stuff and when grandma doesn't want to talk anymore, then you say, but grandma, you know, this is my story too. This is your history, but it's my history. And I'd like to know my history. And surprisingly, grandma might do a lot of talking. These kids did more writing around this, the poetry, bringing their parents to the school to talk about it. The essays they wrote, I've got a collection of these, and they're very touching. But the point being that they've learned something about their place in all of this, where they fit in. And they're not going to forget it. And this is, I think, again, this goes back to the beauty of nonfiction. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Now, Melody. Melody Gaddy, one of our other instructors in the School of Ed, will introduce Stephen.
It is my pleasure to introduce to you Stephen Johnson, highly acclaimed children's book author, illustrator, as well as an outstanding painter, sculptor, and creator of many renowned exhibitions and installations in museums, galleries, public venues throughout the country. Stephen grew up here in Lawrence, graduated from KU with fine arts degrees in painting and illustration in 1987. After graduating, he moved to New York City to continue studying and illustrating, eventually engaging in a wide variety of projects, including writing and illustrating award-winning children's books, public art exhibits, including mosaics in subways of the New York City and Los Angeles, and public art pieces here in Lawrence, actually in front of City Hall and at the Leeds Center. In 2000, he returned to Lawrence and continued to hone his craft and career as an artist, author, and illustrator. Much of Johnson's work in children's literature is characterized by an interest in the alphabet and language, which began with his book Alphabet City, a Caldecott Honor, and a New York Times Best Illustrated Book of the Year. Quoting from a starred review in Publishers Weekly, it says, "Celebrating the lines, curves, and shapes of the letters, Johnson elevates the alphabet into art. A visual tour de force, Johnson's ingenious alphabet book transcends the genre by demanding close inspection of not just the letters, but the world. His books, My Little Red Toolbox, My Little Yellow Taxi, My Little Blue Robot, and others not only have become many children's favorites, but have earned many distinguished awards and honors as Publishers Weekly's bestseller, New York Public Library 100 Titles for Reading and Sharing, Kansas Notable Book, and IRA Teacher's Choice. In his book, A is for Art, an Abstract Alphabet, Stephen represents the alphabet with a series of literal abstractions. This book has also been named the New York Times Best Illustrated Book of the Year, and some of the illustrations are actually featured in several solo museum and gallery exhibitions throughout the country. In his most recent book, Alphabet School, which I just found out today from Stephen, that most of the things in there actually come from the public elementary schools here in Lawrence, has been just published last fall. Children and teachers alike will be enjoying searching for letters in the alphabet in their favorite school settings. We are so fortunate and honored to have Stephen with us tonight as part of our Gertrude Way Strong event. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Stephen Johnson.
Gosh, I sound pretty good. Thank you very much. I'm going to just transfer over into this. I think I got to plug out this thing. So how many people, are any art students here in the crowd, or anybody? And art education, is that what we're in? A few of you? So when I mention a medium of some kind or something, you'll kind of get a feeling for that. My presentation is pretty image heavy, and because I'd rather have you look at that than me. And let's see where I'm going to find this so you don't get to see everything coming up, because that's not cool. Let's see, slideshow. Well, I just did it there. How about that? Oh, it's there? Okay. All right. Sorry. Geez, I'll go back. Slideshow. And can you hear me? Do I have a mic on? Is this good? Yeah. I like to start off a bit about, well, you'll see the journey, where do ideas come from, why are we what we do, what do we, all this kind of good stuff. And then children's books publishing and image making. I come from a family of artists, and what you see on the screen is my grandfather, and he was an artist in the 20s. In fact, Andrew, some of the stuff that you're talking about would be great fodder too for books, in terms of winning a Guggenheim and going to Paris in the 20s and the Depression and selling 17th century French, Spanish frames to pay the bills back in New York City, things like that. It's pretty exciting. He passed away before I was born, but still today we have a lot of his paintings, and this is an example of an oil painting up top and a watercolor. I thought I had a pointer someplace, but I don't. Anyway, so he influenced me a lot, because when I I had two pieces in my bedroom growing up, and these are the two. And the one on the left is a portrait that my grandfather painted in 1924 in charcoal. So I just always was mesmerized at how beautiful that portrait is, just burnt wood with a bit of an eraser. So they'd have society people come in at the Art Institute and pose for hours and days, and this is a gentleman, an elegant portrait. And on the right, you see a watercolor. Well, on the back of that, it said Stephen, age 3. In my mom's handwriting, it was an elephant, but as all of you in the audience did pieces just like this, right, before we start putting symbols on things and eyes and noses and all that kind of stuff. And there's this wonderful abandonment to painting, and there's an abstract quality about it. So both of these inform who I am today. There's the realistic aspect, and then there's the complete abstract aspect, and you'll see why. And I thought, I just found this. That's me my senior year here at KU. And so anyway, this was for a conference at Aspen, Colorado. It was great. They had a scholarship, so a number of us in the illustration design department got to go to Aspen. And of course, as a student, I wasn't paying quite as much attention as I would today, just because you're in Aspen and you're your age and you're doing your other stuff. But it was about success and failure. And recently, I've really come to embrace the idea of failure as a huge learning tool. I mean, it's, you listen to the number of awards that was cited, but it's the failures that actually got me to the awards. It's making mistakes, it's redoing something. And those are really exciting. And so, and I didn't look like this. I'm going to show you now what I looked like my freshman year. Who's freshmen? Any freshmen? No? Okay, good, because you're going to not like this. There I am. That's me on the right at the Battle of the Bands at Hashinger Hall. And I recently found this high school article about my band called High Risk, there at the bottom if you can read it, Rocking to Success. See, I was going to be a rock star, and I had no idea about this art business until I was walking back to Hashinger my sophomore year, and somebody in my dorm said, hey, there's these classes called illustration. I said, what is that? I said, well, where you illustrate a cover of a magazine or this or that. And I said, oh, that sounds pretty cool. So that's when I started to get involved in that. And then I really took off when I went to France my junior year. This is us arriving in Paris right after our plane ride. I'm the guy in the jacket. Can you believe you wear a jacket flying? That was back in the day. There's my little guitar case, but I hardly touched it. I traveled a lot. I looked at art. I really grew up that year. Then I graduated and moved directly to Brooklyn Heights, and this is a view of the promenade. Any of you been to Brooklyn? I just love it over there. And that's when I started to shop around a portfolio. A portfolio at the time was a big black kind of a thing with binders, and you put stuff in it. And this is some examples of some of the covers of Time and stuff they did, some original stuff. There's Woody Allen, all kinds of stuff like that. And I didn't always do good pieces. I just found this. I forgot I illustrated a book before children's books. Are you ready for this one? All right, this is really embarrassing. You can probably find it on eBay. Understanding Your Therapist. Or why is this taking so long? I remember Bob, he took me out for a burger. I think I got that. And I got this job through Tom Allen, who used to teach here at KU. And he said, well, I've got this young student, former student in New York. He might want to do this thing. And it was a kind of a weird job. But so that was 1989. And then eventually I got a lot of children's books. These are some. I actually illustrated A Christmas Carol. I didn't show that, like Andrew was talking about that. I mean, how do you illustrate something, again, that's such a classic? So I watched all the movies, and at the time there was the guy from Star Trek that did a one-man Christmas Carol on Broadway, and he did a great job. I forget his name. Patrick somebody? Stewart, yeah. It was marvelous. And that was a fun book to do. But now I'm going to just show you how one project leads to another, and also return you back to, in my case, my childhood. So here I am on a fire truck, and I had to do a fire truck book. So this is called My Little Red Fire Truck. And hey, I made a video trailer, and let's see if this will work, because this will be 33 seconds in an order of time. This was made over at the Spencer Museum with a buddy, Rob Hickerson. I don't think video trailers are popular anymore, but this is, here you go. Let's see. You can hear it? Oh, anyway, there's sound to this thing. So you have 30 minutes to get your fire truck ready to go, and all these things are movable. They come in and out. Whoa, my thing's stuck over here. And it looks like, let's see. I would bring a suitcase. So the sound to this thing actually has, I wrote a little jingle with an elementary school teacher and the kids sang it. It's kind of cute. But it's a book of this size, and they all open up like that. And what's kind of fun to see is before that's a book, this is just an example of the book dummy. It was based on my design, and so the printer manufactures all this, so you can see how all this comes in and out. And they're complicated books to make, but I really like them. This is me and my 5th grade birthday. I'm over there. And it's a really bad slide, I apologize, but it's of a robot. And I really love these Japanese kind of Godzilla things after school. I'd watch them. And so this is this giant robot cake. So after I did a book called My Little Red Toolbox, which I think I mentioned. Oh my gosh, I'm just making a mess over here, dropping everything. This is Little Red Toolbox. This did really well. And so my editor asked me to do another one. And so I thought about this robot. So the way I work is to just sketch out ideas. This is my sketchbook. So here I'm trying to think of what a robot would look like. Here he's got a skirt kind of deal. Eventually, I did a watercolor kind of Sharpie little study. This is the look of the robot that I wanted. And then here's the book, and it's real. And in order to save time, I built him. And today he comes in a recycled artichoke bag, which, you can't go wrong with that. And voila. And so he comes out of the book just like the same size like that. Sorry. So he rolls and moves, and at the end there's a heart that you can put in. And this is the original version that has a little chip in it. Let's see if we can hear it. And so it's pretty neat. It's a shaped counting book, and it starts with the 6 circles and works back. And there's something kind of groovy about it. I didn't plan on it, but you can take them apart and build them inside out. Pre-Transformers, I missed the phase. You never know. Somebody just found a setup of this in Bed Bath & Beyond. They seem to be finding their ways in those kind of venues, but of course you don't get any press on it. It's just backdrop stuff. But so now, okay, so I did this robot book. Then other things happened. I had a show at the Beach Museum in Topeka. At the same time, they had a robot exhibit, so I proposed doing a robot installation. This is called Representative. There's 100 robots, and there's one inside out right there. And one of the neat sort of things that happened is that the air vents would kick on, and all of a sudden it would trigger the heart, and the guy would go off, and it would freak out all the people in the museum, and the guards loved it. And then this is an installation, I think it's down now, but this was a commission for the Lawrence Memorial Hospital for the pediatric wing in celebration of children, and they wanted an interactive sculpture, so I proposed recreating my robot in wood. And then you see my daughter when she was young there, getting up and spinning the heart. Everything moves, and there's that mandatory railing, so that was another way of getting that solved. And then more recently, last year, actually the beginning of this year, no, last year, I finished an installation in Dallas, at Love Field Airport. So if you fly into the airport and you go through the baggage claim, you go up the tunnel. This was this corridor that I was given. It's not very an exciting space, but what do you do with it? So I've learned that the symbol for Dallas is Pegasus, and so I took my robot heart and I scanned it. These are all glass panels that are manufactured in Munich, Germany, and I'll show you a couple pictures of Munich. And so Pegasus comes out, starts to burst out of the heart, starts to gallop away, takes off in flight, and then the dust underneath transforms into the Lone Star of Texas. So when you walk through the corridor there, it's like a little 8-second movie. So it's kind of groovy. This is just quickly some of the public artwork that I do. You may have recognized that big sculpture at the Lead Center if you go over to the Lead Center Performing Arts, or that was for the 10th anniversary of the Lead Center. The bottom right here is a painting for the 150th anniversary of the School of Law, and that's at the law school. This out at Clinton Lake and then New York City. But more importantly is how my picture books were Murph, I gotta do a Murph book, go into the public setting. This is a big mural in New York City in DeKalb Avenue. And so what you see up here, the letter D and the letter M are the subway trains that go through New York. And there's a basketball team in a college above ground. And so I used a figure from my book called Hoops. Over here is the book cover. And I really like that figure because he's rising up, he's covering his face. You don't know quite exactly the ethnicity. And it needed this figurative element in this mural. The mural is mosaics. And I work with a company in Munich, Germany. This is an example of my Los Angeles mural at the Universal City Metro stop in North Hollywood. And up top you see the workshop. It's, if you can figure, these are the 3 guys working on my piece. I create it in the computer. I send it to Europe, and then they enlarge all my pieces, and then they buy all this wonderful mosaic from Italy, from Mexico, and then they piece it all together like a puzzle. And then they ship it as a puzzle, and then they install it. And that's the installation over there. But much of the imagery in here comes from my abstract alphabet, which I'm going to show now. So there we go. Comes from my letter P. This is called Pop Quiz, or I'll give you 5 seconds to see if anything that starts with the letter P. There's a lot of richness for the letter P. There you have the purple pouring paint on pancakes and pink paper clips, and you have potato chips, peas, peanuts. The thing with the letter P, the food group, is just extraordinary, you know. I did an auction recently for the Cancer Society in Topeka, and they came over, and it didn't work out quite exactly the way I wanted to do it. I wanted to do a potluck party, and everybody bring a food group that starts with a P. You know, you start out with a little prosciutto, a little Pinot Noir, you finish it off with a parfait and a pumpkin pie, you can just go on and on. It's rich with potentiality. And then people will pass out. Get it? Okay, that's not right. There's the cover. And inside you have, this book took 7 years of work, and I'm still paying off some of the debt because it wasn't just doing a painting. These were all big pieces, some of them. On the left, you have the letter C. It's called Camouflage. So each one has a title. So it's countless colorful candies consciously collected, crammed, crushed, and confined, crowd a clear circular container filled to capacity. So there's an alliterative quality with it. The one on the opposite side is all made with dominoes. I like this one on the right here. It's called Fast Food Frenzy. It is 1,455 fake French fries that I flipped and flung on a faint field of fuchsia, and it's full size. So you kind of get where you're going with this. And so the letter F is on the facing page. It's in the evidence, which is the letter E over there. And just going through the dictionary and finding the words that would then create a work of art is really exciting. It's liberating, too, because of the confining nature of just, you can only use those letters. The S was, of course, extraordinarily rich with 99-some pages in the Webster's Dictionary that I was looking at the time. It was great. I had too many words at some point. It was getting out of control. This is called Souvenir Series, so you have, I can't even read it, but so there's sanguine, colored silver, slate black, solid, spoon-shaped, semi-abstract, slant, sloping, sleek, it goes on and on. Sunken spheres and stands with slits that cast shadows in the letter S. At one point, I had shag and spots on it because I liked the material contrast, but well, okay, that was enough. And then I remember my parents were both retired KU professors in French, and so their grammar is fantastic, and at some point my commas were in different places, and I'm not particularly good with my punctuation. But, I was in New York with my editor's office with an old cell phone on speed dial to my parents, because the copy editor was going to make me change my commas. And they're like, don't do it, Stephen. The English teachers are going to hate you. I'm like, okay. So I stuck to my guns. At the back, there's an index that shows you the size and the materials, which is kind of interesting. There's full size, king size, queen size, that kind of stuff. And children have used this book to great effect. Here's two examples. This is a kid's probably a 5th or 6th grader. This is called Wiggly Worms Woven into Wavy Wahoos on Weathered Wood. So I had a show in Montgomery at the Museum of Art, and in the hallways, they had all of the kids' work that they did based on the work. This one's another child's work called A Reverse Red R is resting right of a regular R with reflection next to rabbits running under red peppers. But it makes a pretty effective painting. And just a couple more on this, how it took me into a whole new world of making art. Anything is possible. Washburn just created a new sculpture studio at the time. And here I am on the left pouring organic resin on rubber bands and for a piece called Recycled. And this one is currently going to be purchased by the business school. You'll see it hopefully in the next couple of weeks. And on the right, that's Bob at Waxman Candles. And that's part of my wall hanging pieces that start with the letter W. It's called Wrapped Wishes. So I took objects and I wrapped them with wool that I bought at Sarah's Fabrics. Beautiful wool, and then I coated it with glue and white paint, and then Bob and we would dip them in wax, and then they'd hang up on the wall. And so you can see they're over on the wall. This is the Spencer Museum exhibit. There's some wishes over there. This is my letter L, called Landscape. There's the lime green ladder latched to the left of a long painting layered in lemon yellow, lamp black, lavender, latex, and oil. There's a little light bulb. And my studio at the time, on the left, you can see the beginning manifestation of the painting up there. That you see the yellow and then the red. And on the right, more of my studio. And I'll just show you one more of this process. This was one of the most complicated ones. I was very interested in the idea of installation art and art that was immersed in using liquid and that kind of thing. So the letter I was kind of tricky, but I came, of course, with children, ice cream, how can you go wrong? So this is a piece called Ice Cream Floats. So I figured out on the very left you have a Photoshop rendering of what I wanted. I figured out how to make a triple scoop ice cream cone, had a sculptor friend help me with a mold. And then this is the installation in the Spencer. You see that little green center thing? That's xanthine yellow tracing dye. That's the letter X. So X only has a page and a half, but I found the xanthine yellow stuff. And you pour it into lakes and streams when there's a chemical spill, and it adheres to it. It's very fluorescent, but it gives us excellent little coloration. Then when we put this particular water in it, so there's a close-up, there's a mirror up top, there's a monofilament that goes up through a little hole, there's a light below, it reflects in the water. So it ends up looking like this. And this is called, and so you have an installation in an industrial interior of identical, imitation insoluble, inverted, immersed, isolated, goes on. And then finally, here's a view of the show. You can see the ice cream cones over there. This is my letter M. It's called Meditation on the Memory of a Princess. And so it's a man-made magenta mass which mimics multiple mattresses in a museum and blah, blah, blah. And then in the middle we have a little mini mauve marble that went right up through the vent in the middle of the museum there. And so those are my kids at the time being goofy. And so that led to this book, My Little Pink Princess. And, I think we'll just show it to you. It's another one of those interactive books, but it's just in brief. You open it up and you get a letter from the Springtime Ball. The seal right here is from the Spencer Research Library. I went in and looked at their archives, and I found this beautiful old seal that was all cut in a weird way, so I reconstructed it to make it effective here. You get a letter from the King and Queen. No prince in my book, because as I like to say, who is this dude at the end of these stories anyway? Pops out of the woods. So you have a magic slate and a feather quill. You have a fan that opens up. I like this page. This here is a scratch and sniff, so you can take them all out, the different perfumes that go in. And so I had to write copy for all that. It was kind of cool. These are your rings, rings and bracelets. And you have a tiara that comes out here. And then finally you have a letter from the fairy godmother, which, by the way, I hired Christy Schneider, who did the poster here, because she does great hand lettering. They hired somebody in New York, but I really didn't like the way it worked, and Christy, so she created all this typography in here. And the letter reads, "My dearest princess, with this key you may open this vanity box. Inside you will find a magic mirror. Only a true princess who is filled with grace, humility, intelligence, self-confidence, and imagination will be able to see a reflection. Use it wisely. With love, your fairy godmother." So let's see, you open it up like this, and there's the mirror. I look at it every day. So that was kind of fun to do. And how do you design a fairy godmother envelope? It has a sort of presidential look, doesn't it? Kind of like well, maybe that's okay. So now I'm going to talk to you about my alphabet books, other alphabet books. Alphabet City. This one really put me on the map in terms of staying in the business. It was a joy to make, because when I was living in New York, this is kind of fun to see the French version and Korean versions. It's a joy, when you see your books translated into different languages. But basically what I did is I walked around New York, and the screen went blank, and there we go. So, oh, wait a minute, hold on. Is there anything there? Oh, okay. All right, well, this is, I would take photographs and then take them to Kinko's or wherever there, because this is before computer stuff, and then they would print them out, and I redrew everything large. So these pieces are about this big, and so you can see the start of my painting there. This is all using watercolors and pastels, if any of you use those mediums. And I actually paint the pastel, which is a really weird thing to do, but it creates a lot of really excellent detail. And so there's the Z on the right. These are kind of getting all weird. So here's two more. There's the B. It's a fire escape. On the back of the Eldridge Hotel, you can see a lovely bee across from the library. And I like the T in the sky, the negative space in the sky. There's the D and the E. So these are more up close. The E is in the Beach Museum collection, and the F and the O. And the O is in Paul Simon's bedroom in New York City. Sometimes that story's better than any of those awards, you know what I'm talking about? He came over after yoga and had a cup of coffee, and we talked about Broadway and Christmas and Hanukkah, and it was fun. So then I did a number book. So this is called City by Numbers. And when you do numbers, what's interesting is where do you go? So this is my little layout. Children's books are 32 pages long, and so counting is an interesting concept. So up on the left you have page 1, 2 would be your dedicated copyright page, maybe 3 is text. In my case, page 4 is blank, and then I start the book. But you can maybe get a quick sense of the pagination, so you could have a single page, and a double page spread, and how does that work out? And so in 32 pages, this book was published right before the turn of the century. I went to 21, so it made a nice sequence. Here's the number 4. It needed to be a really long image. That's the Brooklyn Bridge. I'm just going to show you a couple of these. On the left, that's the 12. If you look at the light rectangles, Thank goodness for digital alarm clocks, right? And there's the 18. Can you see the 18 in there? This one might be a little tricky to see with the light going on right there, but this is number 16, and the light twig there, and then there's a dark twig over there. And this one's now in the collection of the Hunt Institute and the Carnegie Mellon. They have one of the largest botanical illustration collections in the country, and it's an honor to be in that collection. This is the 21. You can figure it out there. It's a big 2 in the dark shape there, and the 1 over there. Kids always want to know how I got them to turn out all those lights. Well, you got to have connections. So then this leads me to the last project there is Alphabet School. There I am as a second grader. I went back to Quarterly and some of my schools and looked around. And this book is a result of going to speak to schools for all these years, and the teachers and librarians and parents using my book to see their world differently. So it was great fun. It's always great fun. As you know, kids love to find shapes. They like to hide, anything that they can make relationships about, visual relationships. There's a book. But my problem was, how do I illustrate it? Because I already did, the alphabet and number book and these high realistic paintings, and I sort of had moved on from that. So I tried different mediums. On the left, this is colored pencil. Then I did a silk screen at the Arts Center downtown, and then I found this one over here on the right was a monoprint. And I'll try to lead you through how I worked. This process is kind of complicated. But I wanted something that had kind of an old-fashioned feeling. So here's some old envelopes and textures, but I like that coloration and the edge quality, the edges of those. So I used that in conjunction with actual art. This is actually, Jane, this is Quill Run. So this is a library, and I did a collage of different pieces together. And then on the right, you see the result of lots of monoprints. Monoprints, I think, did I read something? Monoprints, basically, is just one of anything. So I figured out a way of printing. So I scanned that A, for example, in the computer, and then I figured a way of printing it out where the ink would just be wet for a while, and that would be on a piece of paper like this. Oh, and I think I brought my burnisher. Hold on. There we go. And then you go like this. Really hard, you press down. And then you lift. This place is beginning to look like my studio. And you get an image like that. And I would do this over and over again, and I want happy accidents, And then I would scan my best pieces back into the computer and laboriously merge all the different information and piece it together, and then pop the colors and send the files digitally to New York. And so the book is actually all of that together. And sometimes I would do a painting in the case of this is the letter L. So there's a pencil sharpener photograph. There's a painting I did, but I much prefer the monoprint. The monoprint also gives us the textural quality, I think, gives it a sense of, sort of a nostalgic memory, if you will. So going to school is about memory, too. But this sort of sealed the deal. That was my daughter's half-eaten peanut butter jelly sandwich. And that was like, okay, I got to do this book. And then on the right, I went to schools around town watching kids eat, because I really... Totally creepy, right? Hey, I got a pass. But they were so nice and neat. And I was like, I wanted a real chaos. So it didn't happen, so I made my own chaos. And my kids were looking at me like I was nuts. So, but I really like the effect to have, that whole kind of, so what do you put in a kid's lunch that's healthy, right? So you got to have the right granola and fruit and yogurt. And then just to finish off this little presentation here, here's some from the book. There's the bee in a globe. Oh, no, sorry, bee in a bus. The C in a globe. And the J, which, this is Cordley on the left. I don't know if they kept that room, but it was just an amazing classic sort of Norman Rockwell era room with wood paneling, the American flag. I put ball on there, and then if you can see, there's a I Love Teacher with a little apple and a pencil underneath it. I mean, my gosh, it doesn't get any better than that. And then on the right, that's Pinckney Elementary, and then I reworked the design and put in children's drawings of my robot book that they had sent me. So I tuck in little things like that. I like this one a lot, the M, in contrast with just the type, you know, on the back, which is probably going to be a thing of the past. And there's the N, and I put my abstract alphabet up top on the left. And down below, I think I reworked Maurice Index, Where the Wild Things Are, so it's Where the Mild Things Are by Ian Enack. And we created a school dictionary because Simon & Schuster doesn't publish dictionaries. And at the bottom, I put PW, which is Paula Weisman is my editor. So you do things like this, it makes it fun. You know, if you look at Chris Van Allsburg books, I think he has his dog in every single book in some manifestation. So, and then here's the R in the rope, the S in the slide. Now, are you ready for this? This was fourth graders at Pinckney that discovered the letter U. I think it's brilliant. You know, the T is from Central, and the Y is from Free State. There's the Z. And the reason why we all do it, like Andrea said too, we get these kind of things in the mail. Happy kiddos. And then I'm just going to, with the slides, just end with these two. This is my recent studio. I just finished the Jayhawk for the sesquicentennial for the Alumni Center. And you have 1865 in the type font of the beginning of KU, and then on the other side, 2015 in the current type font, and this whole thing is just kind of an abstract painting. Hey, look at that, up top there's a guitar, can you see that? It's purely decoration at this point. And then lots of books, and it's kind of the chaos. But those are some of the slides, and I don't know, are we good on time? Do we have time for any questions or anything like that?
Questions?
Yeah.
So, Stephen, you showed us wonderful art for books, and I'm just curious, do you paint on your own in the sense of, do you like to just paint pictures, maybe scenic things? Or
Oh, right, and without any reason to do anything like being published and that kind of stuff, or content-wise, or just paint freely? Yes, I do. Actually, I've been out to the Flint Hills and painted on location. I just love it, and I've been making up landscapes now. And the other thing I do is I do just abstract collages, purely for the sake of just putting the paint down. And recently I've been doing them on these very tiny little kana cards, or little Japanese, learning Japanese cards. I like the intimacy. And then I just had some prints actually I delivered to the framer today that we enlarged them to be about this big. So you take something extremely small and you enlarge it, it's a whole different world. Marvelous textures come out. I mean, if you go to the museum and you see a little Michelangelo drawing a red chalk, or Leonardo that was in the show, and then you see the big huge banner out front, I mean, that is a whole different conversation, but very exciting. And yes, so I do that. And, oh, you know what I should tell you? This is my book I'm working on now in dummy form. In brief, I've been working on this far too many years. The book is now called Dance Is, and it's about dance. It's I've way overcomplicated this whole thing, but it only occurred to me about 2 years ago how to make this book actually really an exciting book. And it's this big. On one side you have a story, on the other side you have a dance step. So I've worked with the dancers, and what happens is you can open it up, and it unfolds to 18 feet. So you can actually literally dance on the book, which is in some cases a no-no. But in this case, it's a yes-yes. So, this is part of my graphic problem right now, is how do I make it simple and understandable to all. But I think it's the heartbeat of the book, because at the end of the day, at the end, you're actually a little physically moved, and your heart rate will go a little bit more. And on the other side, it's very sparse text about dance and losing yourself in that kind of a moment. But anyway, so this is what's on the burner right now. And, oh, that was the ding. Any more questions? Yeah.
Where is that lovely studio?
This is in the Warehouse Art District. So I'm actually lucky to have an actual lived loft. So I actually have a kitchen in the back and a bedroom upstairs and this big kind of space in the front. So it's exactly what I work best in this way. Some people like to go to a studio or, you know, write elsewhere. I don't know. Everybody has their own way of doing things. But, you know, I like to cook. I like to have my leftovers. I like to walk around and not have to worry about the snow outside or that kind of stuff. But anyway, that's the studio for now. Yeah.
Do you have a website? These girls are very interested in this next book.
Oh, are you dancers? Yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah, it's StephenTJohnson.com, and I apologize, it's not up to date, so but I'll get more content up there. Oh, I have a KU student who just helped me on Instagram. Follow me on Instagram. I didn't know that. I get it now. I mean, you know, it's kind of not bad. But so I'll get some of this stuff on there. I just did some prints in the style of the alphabet book to support the veterans. So there's a veteran show that's going to be touring around Washington, D.C., and they're going to auction off some of these prints. So I'll put some of those up on Instagram. Anyway, yes, kiddos, check it out. Good, well, thank you so much. Pardon me as I wind up my book. Actually, I'll do this after.
Oh, Andrea and Stephen, it's been a joy. Thank you so much. Your work is wonderful, and it's been fun to hear about and see it on the big screen and hear how you do it. So I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge and thank the many people who have helped make this evening a success. My colleagues, Dr. Karen Jorgensen and Dr. Arlene Berry, Allison Paddock, Melody Gaddy, Dr. Liz Kwalchek, who did our lovely posters out here, Janelle Laudick, Sherry Satoff, John Funk, Frank Carey, our wonderful technology person, and Dan Burgart, as well as School of Education staff and our student support this evening. All these people have put things together to make this possible, as well as Lisa out there with her staff for books. In just a couple of minutes, Stephen and Andrea will leave and get ready to sign more books. If you're interested in purchasing books, they'll be out there. So stick around. Door prizes are to come. So I'm going to say thank you again and help me thank them one more time.